Welcome back again to Homer Bound, a podcast where a couple nerds read through and discuss Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. We are on episode 4, discussing books 7 and 8. I'm Wriste.
I'm Llama.
Hello, Llama. I guess there isn't really too much to say as a prelude. No housekeeping this time around, except thanks to folks for sticking through the extra long episode we had last time. We'll probably do more of those when the occasion calls for it. There's some very important special books that I think are worth discussing, especially the one happening in this next episode, Book 9, The Embassy to Achilles, on which we'll also have a guest. Yeah, that's right, we're going to start having guests, so someone else can break up the predictability of our voices.
We're going to shake up the usual routine a little bit.
Absolutely. So, and of course, I'll say this as many times as I want, because this is my podcast. Don't skip Dr. Daniel's end of episode tags. They're always great. And I especially enjoyed this one since we took a little bit more time with our last episode. We give him some more time with this tag, and so we got to cover some fun stuff, including Llama's celebration bowl
of freedom. The wine bowl of freedom, which I just love the mental imagery of there being a wine bowl of freedom. As it turns out, it's very real. Listen to Grad's tag where he explains it a lot more in depth.
You'll probably find something like that yourself on the internet somewhere. Drink from the bowl of freedom.
I'd be into that.
Also, as of course, a quick reminder, content warning. Me and Llama, despite our status as real-life adults, are actually children, and we love saying swear words, so you'll probably hear some bad, non-unchristian language coming from us, and as well, of course, we're discussing the Iliad and the Odyssey, so there's plenty of violence and other mature themes that we'll be
bodies
talking about
of grown-ups, very childish minds,
which qualifies us perfectly to be discussing all this.
Absolutely.
I guess we can do a quick recap. Despite how extensive our talk was on book 5, from a really high level, it's pretty straightforward. You know, like this is the first book where the fighting breaks out, and as Grad pointed out, this is the first. I can't remember the Greek word that he used, but the book of excellence. Where we focus on a hero and we get to see them perform at their best. And that was book 5, Diomedes Fights the Gods. And, you know, the book delivers. He does fight some gods. He wounds 2. It's all very, very epic. As I said, this is the first book where this is not only the first, I guess, excellence book where we focus on one character, but this is also the first big battle book.
And boy, is it ever.
Yeah, and I guess it's also the longest book. Not that it means too much that it's the longest, but, you know, you'll spend the most time with it, I guess. And it's all worth it. There's so much drama.
As we did.
Yes. Following that, book 6, Hector returns to Troy. Again, sort of what's on the tin. There's some more battlefield shenanigans. We got to see a little bit of Agamemnon and Menelaus interacting on the battlefield. We got to see a very interesting exchange with Glaucus and Diomedes, which Grad also talked about a little bit.
Xenia, I believe was the word. Xenia.
It could be. I'll take your word for it, because my memory for words that aren't English.
I also almost certainly said that wrong. I'm sorry already, Grad.
There was basically an exchange of pleasantries born of the truth, which they both gradually realize as the scene goes on, that their forefathers were friends, or that they had housed each other, and so their parting in friendship, Glaucus and Diomedes, is sort of a honoring of that custom. Neither of us really had the context for when we read it, and now we do. But past that, you know, Hector gets to return to Troy, and this is the dad book where Hector gets to be a dad. He gets to be a husband.
We meet the child with the coolest name ever.
Yes, Styanax. And it's probably the healthiest relationship in the entire book. I don't think there's one that's really comes closer, except and maybe this is a hot take, but I really like the relationship between Agamemnon and Menelaus.
Yeah, they have some really like genuine brotherly love going on there.
That there is something genuine there. And it's it's hard to tell what's genuine and what's just like camaraderie and stuff. But Agamemnon is looking out for his younger brother, and we'll get to see some more of that in this episode as well. But yeah, Hector returns to Troy, gets to hang out with his family, and then he leaves with Paris in order to get back into battle with the both of them at the helm. And that brings us to book 7, Ajax duels with Hector.
I wonder what will happen.
Yeah.
Yet again, this is a name of a book that gives us what is going to happen in the book. Obviously, there's going to be some more to it, but I've always kind of loved how these books, a lot of them have very, very clear, plot lines. Diomedes fights the gods. Hector returns to Troy. Ajax duels with Hector.
Frog in my throat.
It happens.
I should stop eating frogs. So when
frogs are delicious, actually.
I have had frog before. I remember being told it tasted like chicken. I think I was young
they
enough
do
to
taste kind
believe
of
it.
like chicken.
I feel like everything tastes like chicken if you fry it. So
pretty much.
Anyway, we're already getting off topic. There was one thing that did stand out to me about book 7, and this is, I guess, a little bit extra textual because as Dr. Daniel explained, these titles are not canon. I do not know if Fagles was following some convention when he named these, or if he just sort of spun them up from his own interpretation of the story. But what I find really interesting is that this is called Ajax duels with Hector,
and not the other way around.
The other way around. Yeah. Okay. So you're on the same.
Oh yeah. No, I kind of had the same thought because it's an interesting. I mean, the end of the last book, we have Hector and Paris kind of stepping into that shiny spotlight of battle, and now we have almost a turning of the tables in the title.
Yes, and it's especially weird because Hector's the one who issues this challenge for this duel that we're going to witness. And I guess this goes back to a little bit of what Brad was talking about in his tag last episode on the books of excellence. He listed a few, I think he gave an exhaustive list, which was like Diomedes, Agamemnon, Patroclus. I can't remember if there were other, Achilles, of course. I can't remember if there were others. I think there was one more. But Ajax doesn't get his, and neither does Menelaus. But in the titles of a lot of these books, they tend to spread the glory fairly evenly. Ajax gets a book where his name is the first name in the title. Menelaus gets one of those as well in book 17. Yeah, it's
almost like a dad on the sports team who's like, everybody gets to play.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense because even if there are some, like, I can't remember which book it is. I feel like it's book 13 or something like that, where our characters of focus are the Cretans, Idomeneus and Meriones. We see a lot of them. That one's not named after them.
No, it's like the battle for the ships.
Yeah, it's just something that I found interesting. Again, I don't know if this is some machination of on Fagles' part, or if this is a convention that he's sort of been following.
Could even be a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. Who knows?
Yeah, it stood out to me especially because my brain wants to say Hector duels with Ajax, but the title is Ajax duels with Hector, which feels like a really deliberate choice, especially considering all of the context.
And I think it is. Whether it's convention or whether it was a choice by Fagles, I think it is a deliberate choice.
I don't know who knows. Maybe we'll stumble upon the answer as time goes on. And maybe Dr. Daniel will have some insight on that.
Agree.
I promise not to call him out specifically. We're gonna that's my one. That's my one for this episode. Won't do it again, I promise. You don't even have to answer it, okay? You can leave it in the dark. It's up to you.
I'm writing this down. Promised yet again not to call out Dr. Dan.
Anyway, past the very first line of the book, which I guess is the title, into the actual body of the book, we get back to a little bit of fighting with Hector and Paris. There isn't too much going on with the fighting. I think it just establishes them as in the thick of the action. Stuff's still going on. Paris is shooting arrows. Apparently, he's a pretty good shot. And what happens is kind of similar to what happens in book 5, where one of the gods takes another god aside and makes a proposition regarding the battle. Athena pulled Ares aside and suggested that, they just watch. Apollo makes a slightly more interesting suggestion than just, hey, let's sit around and do nothing. Apollo basically says, hey, let's not have more people die. Let's just set up a duel. Let's have some of the strongest folks fight it out in one-on-one combat.
In essence, he's almost kind of asking for them to fight it out for their various sides by proxy. They're choosing a proxy man to go out there and basically do the fighting for that side, as opposed to, continuing the mass havoc and destruction that is going on currently.
Yeah, it's obviously meant to be temporary. Apollo acknowledges that this fighting will start again tomorrow, and all that, but that's what he throws out, and Athena apparently loves it. She's like, yes, absolutely, let's do it. And she has... This is the second time Helenus has delivered a message to Hector. He delivered a message to Hector in book 6, telling him to go back and pray to Athena, or to have the women pray to Athena. And this time he delivers a message, what seems to be directly from Athena, which amounts to, go out and challenge
whoever their champion is. Yeah.
Yes. And this part actually sort of reminded me of what happened in book 2, where someone else reported a message directly from the gods. It was a dream, but I don't know if that makes a huge difference. I don't know, but we know that the gods can kind of lie. So even though, like Helenus delivers this message to Hector, and Hector's like very confident, Helenus effectively says to Hector, your time to die isn't now. Go out and challenge the strongest, or go on and issue this challenge. And Hector just takes that at face value instantly, and he's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, let's do it."
Right, I recognize this person. I know what you're telling me. You're telling me to go out and do this crazy thing that you're telling me to do. But it's okay because I trust you because I've seen you before. It's fine.
Well, it's not that he's trusting Helenus. It's that they're trusting the gods. They're taking this message from the gods at face value, and we know from experience the gods are very wily and also quite willing to lie if it suits their purposes. See Zeus's dream that he sent to Agamemnon.
They're constantly
clearly a disastrous lie.
Scheming and disguising and making things less than transparent. Almost sometimes it seems for their own amusement, but I think in this case it's more of just a strategy to kind of plant the right seed.
Yeah, or when you say plant the right seed, I mean like just give them the good idea? Or
yeah, to kind of ensure the right course of action the way they want things to go.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm focusing more specifically on like the promise that Hector will live, right? Like I think that's what emboldens him to make this challenge in the first place, right? Because on line 60, Helenus says, "It's not the hour to meet your doom, not yet. I heard a voice of the gods who live forever."
Yeah.
And of course, there would be no reason for Helenus to lie. I don't think Hector would distrust his brother, but as I said, the gods have proven blatantly dishonest before. So it's interesting and somewhat alarming that Hector is
so readily trusting.
Yeah, he's very ready to. He's not as crafty or suspicious. I mean, I don't even know who's supposed to be suspicious of the gods when they say one thing or another. I don't know if you have an example of anyone who does something like that, where they're like, I heard the voice of God or of one of the gods, but.
Nah, I don't think I'm going to go with that. What it seems to me is that no matter really which god it's coming from or the guise that they take, the characters always seem to have a sense that this message is more important, and therefore they feel like it's worth believing, like right off the bat.
And it's possible that there's an air of, regardless of whether they're telling me the truth or not, what they're actually telling me to do is something that I should do.
Right,
it's think that like
whether
disobeying the gods would be bad.
Whether it strikes true to them as a person or there's something about the message that is so convincing, it always seems to find the right spot within whoever is receiving that message.
Yeah, and definitely it definitely found Hector's spot because he's very he was very interested. The very next line is, When Hector heard that challenge, he rejoiced, and right in the no man's land along the lines he strode, gripping his spear mid-haft. Gripping the spear mid-haft, I'm assuming means just like holding it at its center in a very like, hey, I have my weapon, but I'm not gonna use it or something. Some show of truce or hold on just a minute, let's talk.
Yeah, I have no idea what mid-haft mean. I mean, that sounds like a technical term about like weaponry, and I am wholly unfamiliar. I don't know, I got the impression that he's just like, he's ready to go. He feels this message within him to be true. He knows that this is what he's ready to do, and he goes for it.
And to cash in a little bit on what Andromache said about him in the previous book, he does have this sort of fiery courage about him that, as she predicts rightly, will doom them all, will doom him. This time isn't the time it dooms him, but he's very ready to take this, to issue this challenge, which he does. He issues a challenge. Let's see, what does it say?
I have it here.
Yeah,
Hector's challenge.
It's funny because he opens it by basically kind of blaming Zeus for all the problems that are for the slaughter, sort of. So our truce has been broken. Zeus has brought them all to nothing, and so I guess he suspects divine foul play.
Well, I mean, okay, so in short, what he does is he says, if this person comes out and kills me, then look upon it, Zeus. You will see that that is the man that, like, bested Hector. But if it goes the other way, then it will be me who, there will be a mound of death that people see, and they will see, like, that's the guy that Hector absolutely murdered.
Yeah, he's making a declaration of his fame, which at the very end of that passage he does, like my fame will never die.
Yeah. So they will say someday, and my fame will never die.
I don't know how notable it is, but this is, I guess, a sort of recurring thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's that recurring theme of glory to be won on the battlefield, and that at the end of the day, a lot of times what these battles come down to is making a name for yourself and ensuring basically immortality by having your story heard forever. Whether it was through, death in glory or conquering.
I'd be curious to see if they read their long-lasting glory as a form of immortality. Because in this world, at least, they know where they're going when they die. They go down to the House of Hades.
Yeah.
And so how important those things are that they leave behind, obviously it's kind of important, or fairly important, because that's the sort of thing that they value in these
But the thing is,
battles.
like, it is immortality, because so they will say someday, and my fame will never die.
I guess I'm wondering, like, do they identify with their fame beyond the grave? Is that how they conceptualize it?
Who knows? But I think to me that says, like, that they kind of do, because they know that they're going down to the House of Hades, but they also know that by making a name for themselves in such a way that, again, like he literally says, my fame will never die. There's an expectation that it will live beyond them, and almost like they can kind of like see it from below as these shades.
I guess the only thing that this is getting a little bit far ahead of, when Achilles is talking about how he'll die young, he never, or it doesn't seem as though he ends up comparing the length of his glory to the length of his life, and he seems to value his life more than that glory. The glory that lasts forever isn't the kind of immortality that he's interested in. And so I guess I'm curious, since again, like,
yeah, but I think that can just
die.
be like a sense of differing values. What Hector and other people seek in glory from battle or otherwise, and have this immortality, this form of immortality through fame and through stories. Achilles is just like, I don't really care that much about that. Like, what I am worried about is happening here and now, and relates more to my pride. That's just kind of the feeling that I get from him.
Yeah, and he recognizes that when he dies, he'll be dead, and that'll sort of,
as all of us must.
Again, I'm still trying to pull apart in my head what exactly Achilles thinks, which of course we'll get to in the next episode. But past that, I guess this is a nice little primer for that discussion, because we'll definitely be talking about the fame that Achilles is offered in place of a longer life. So beyond that, Hector issues his challenge, and there's a lot of to-do about who will answer it. At first, basically no one answers, because they're too spooked by Hector to do so. Then Menelaus gets up and yells at everyone for being chickens, and he says, I'll do it. I'll fight him.
Out of the corner, Nestor gets up and is like, well, if I were young again.
There are a couple interesting things that happened with Menelaus. One, and I think I sort of called this forward in a couple episodes ago, or maybe even last episode, where Agamemnon is very quick to recognize that Menelaus will fall to Hector if he fights him, and so he immediately shoves him away. He's like, "Hey, no! You go sit over there. Don't do any of that. Hector will destroy you." I would say, I guess I'm curious as to how true that is, but the poet himself then addresses Menelaus, and this will happen a few times in the Iliad, and I'm not totally sure what to make of it.
Yeah, I
it.
underlined every single one of these passages where, the way I thought of it, I mean, we've talked about it being kind of second person-y, but I also think of it almost as kind of breaking the fourth wall, because I'm imagining this as a performance, and how would they have dealt with this portion in a performance, or how did this portion in a performance become this on paper?
Yeah, when the poet refers directly to a character in the story.
Yeah. I can read this little portion if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
And then and there, Menelaus, the death stroke would have blazed before your eyes, dead at the hands of Hector, a far stronger man, if Argive kings had not leapt up and caught you. This is not Agamemnon talking. This is the narrator.
Yes. This is the poet. And this, as I said, this happens a few times. I can't remember if this is the first time this has happened.
I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure there have been one or two in previous chapters, because I remember flipping through and seeing them, and we ended up talking about other things, but those portions have always stuck in my mind, just because, all of the things I just mentioned before.
Like I said, we'll see it sort of speckled throughout the story, but we'll see it very pointedly in book 16, where the poet refers directly to Patroclus in a very sort of affectionate kind of way, which, yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of it, but I figured now is as good a time to bring it up as any, because it's unusual, and it's also interesting. It's very severe.
The choice of this passage for the narrator, the poet, to do that, there has to be some kind of significance about it. I'm convinced that there has to be some significance of why that moment, why Menelaus, why this particular instance of him doing something where Agamemnon's no.
It definitely feels more dramatic, regardless, and that could be its purpose, right? To make it a little more dramatic, to suggest that Menelaus has come very close to death, and his brother keeps him away from it, whether he knows it or not. And then after Agamemnon puts him down, we get
back in my day.
What you jump to.
Yeah, so Nestor pops up and just oh, to be a young man again. I wish I could do it. I wish I could fight all of these people for you. This is Nestor's thing. I love Nestor because I think you get a lot of really interesting stories out of him that lend more background and almost kind of more cultural information. But it's also just hilarious because almost every time he pops up to say something, there is some reference to how old he is and how much younger he wishes he still was.
And some great dude he suplexed at some point in time. He talks about this huge guy that he beat, and he was like, if that guy was alive, Hector would meet his match in combat. But unfortunately, I'm not young enough to actually challenge Hector. You all suck.
The other thing that I love about this, though, is that every time he does this, there's almost always a passage right after it that's and 10 men sprang up and started shouting no, Nestor, you were so awesome back in your day. Let us take care of this now.
I do think it's interesting that he says, this is toward the end of his speech, not one person has gotten up to respond to this challenge, but That's not necessarily true, because Menelaus did. He did just a moment ago before he was told to not do so.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing he says is, like, you, the bravest of all Achaeans, and not one with the spine to battle Hector face to face. Like, he's clearly pissed that, like, if he had a younger body, would be very eager to fight in this, but he's looking on all of these younger dudes who are just, like, not interested in all in fighting Hector. And why would they be? Because Hector is terrifying.
Yeah, and when he says, not one person has met this challenge, I imagine Menelaus would hear this and like pouting because like, what do you mean? What am I, chopped liver?
Although I don't know, I feel like there's probably some part of Menelaus that understands also that he is like too powerful of a person to be going out there and getting killed.
Well, you mean Menelaus himself is too powerful a person to go out there and get
just
killed?
like he has too much like clout.
Well, you say that, but then we have the challengers. Numbering among them is Agamemnon himself, right? He's Lord of Men, the most important dude. He's more important than his brother for sure. But
yeah,
he
but
casts
nobody
his
wants
lot.
to talk back to him.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess Agamemnon doesn't have this. I mean, if that is even a mindset, this mindset of I'm too important to.
I mean, I could be like totally wrong. I could be completely wrong, but I also the way I see it is kind of like Agamemnon has the ability to hold Menelaus back and be like, "You're my brother. You're too important. You got to stay out of this." And Menelaus is like, "Okay, I don't like that, but okay." Whereas Agamemnon kind of gets to go in and be like, "I do what I want. Who's going to question me?"
Well, I don't think that Agamemnon is holding his brother back because his brother's too important to die. I think he genuinely cares about whether his brother lives or dies.
I think he does too, but I think there's probably part of that as well.
It could be, but again, like he also puts himself in there, and I imagine Agamemnon is well aware of how important he is. So unless he fails to conceptualize exactly how important he is in comparison to his brother, which I don't think he does.
I don't see it that way. I see it more as narcissism. Like, I feel like he wouldn't be able to not put himself in the ring. I feel like he knows that he's not going to be chosen. Like, even if they're casting lots, I feel like he just knows out of, like, whatever, like, the god will not choose my lot, or,
maybe. Even
if my lot does come up, other people will volunteer for me. That's a feeling that I get. It's kind of like when you're playing a king in a game of poker, and like the king wins over and over, and everyone knows it's not because the king is winning. It's because everyone else is letting him win, but they can't say that.
Oh, when you say the king, you mean like
I don't mean
and not the
this...
card the king. Okay.
Yeah.
No. Well, yeah, like someone
like
sure,
a king is playing a game of poker and everyone is letting him win because they know that it would be wrong not to let him win, because then you're beating the king.
I guess I have a slightly more charitable view of Agamemnon, which is that I do believe that he is sincere, both when he pulls Menelaus back and when he throws his name into the pot. He seems like a guy who's fairly sincere, even if he has certain issues. And I'm not sure I share that view entirely. Okay, well, we'll see if I can bring you around. I think Agamemnon has a lot of positive qualities, which whether they're born of virtue or vice is another question. I'm not sure how much, at least within the text of the Iliad, Agamemnon deserves to be looked upon so uncharitably. I think that his initial exchange with Achilles instantly throws him into a bad light. But if we look at, especially if we look at Achilles' actions a little bit more critically, Achilles is guilty of, I think, far more significant things than Agamemnon. Again, at least in the context of the Iliad, it's possible that there are some extra-textual things that he's guilty of that might sour his character. But past that...
Yeah, I think I fall on the side where I do assign blame to all of them. And I just think that, like, a lot of what goes on in these books show a lot of the undesirable qualities of people put against each other in war. I think I read it slightly more negatively than you might. I'm a little less inclined to be charitable to them just because there's so much conflict with everyone all the time. And everyone is pulling in different directions. So I read things a little bit more that way, I think. But I think both of our interpretations have the possibility to be completely correct. They're just different interpretations.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess I'll be keeping an eye out for, because also like I started out sort of seeing Agamemnon in that kind of way.
Yeah.
As I read it and started to compare his actions to like Achilles and the sorts of things that he does in the text, I found myself sort of, again, Agamemnon has a lot of faults. We talked about his insecurities, or his apparent insecurity, and his rough treatment with, or his weird feud with Achilles, and all that stuff. And we'll also be able to talk about that in the next book as well, where he, or not in the next book, but in the next episode. But we spent a lot of time on this. What's important is that 9 people get up, and after Nestor has sort of dressed them down and called them a bunch of little cowards, and they're like, I'm not a coward. And so we get Agamemnon, we get Diomedes, we get the Aeantes, the 2 Ajaxes, we get Idomeneus and his war aide Meriones, we get Eurypylus, Thoas, and Odysseus. It's interesting that Odysseus is in there because I don't know how much Odysseus is known for his great fighting power, but he's in there as well. And of course, because of the title of the book, we know that Ajax's lot is drawn, specifically Great Ajax. Great Ajax is the one who gets to face down Hector.
Poor little Ajax.
Hey, but he put his lot in there too.
No, I know. Every time I feel bad for little Ajax.
He's always living in Ajax's shadow.
Quite literally. I like how
past that. Yeah, go on.
I was gonna say I like how in this scene, like everyone is like trying to almost like not look at him as he's going around seeing if anyone recognizes the lot that is cast, and then Ajax is like, that one's mine. he's pretty excited. I can't remember exactly, but wasn't there a line where it said that the people were hoping that it was Ajax whose lot was drawn? Yes, everyone is literally hoping, like, please not me, make it the big guy. Make it this giant guy that we have who we know to be incredibly good at fighting. And so, yeah, Ajax goes down with great vigor.
Yeah, we get a awesome description of him, describing like the power of his strides and his huge spear. I love like the phrase long shadow, like the spear's long shadow. It's very evocative. It's used in this description, but it's also used when, like, someone throws a spear and it's like the spear's long shadow trails it or whatever.
I like to think that during this description you can, like, if you just close your eyes, you can literally hear Ajax like thumping forward and just see this like huge spear, and he approaches Hector and it's just like, hi.
Yeah, Hector freaks out.
Here I am.
Yeah, Hector freaks out a little bit. He's also shaken by the image of Ajax sort of stomping toward him. Yeah, and this is not the first time he'll be terrified of someone coming toward him. Hector is scared. Well, yeah, I guess you describe him as scared, which I guess leads me to ask, like, does that make him a coward, or is that?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think it's like anyone, and I think there are a lot of battles throughout history that are kind of described as like a small guy going against a much bigger guy, and they have that initial wave of fear, and then they realize if they adjust tactically, I can beat this guy.
I guess what I'm asking more so is that, so to jump really far ahead, and this will be quick, but Hector gets to experience this same sort of looming fear again in everyone's favorite book, book 22, Hector, The Death of Hector, where he sees Achilles and he gets the same sort of fear, but this time he runs away and he starts, running around, and Achilles chases him and all that good stuff. And I guess my perception of how the warriors treat, I guess, fear or running or fleeing kind of I think we'll get to see Agamemnon suggest that they cut and run.
Yeah.
And this is sort of viewed as cowardice, even if it's like a sensible decision. Obviously, it would make sense to be afraid of Ajax, but running from him would be bad. But it's difficult to say how much he would blame, would we blame Hector from fleeing from Achilles? Like, would we blame Agamemnon for wanting to flee the battlefield with his men?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I wouldn't, but they probably would. You know, I think you take a more forgiving stance as the reader who is removed from the situation than the people who are in it, you know, really experiencing. Like, can you imagine seeing the person that everyone sees as the most fearful person on your side, like, quaking at the sight of this giant who's about to almost kill him?
Yeah, well, let's take that opportunity to jump right into the
which, by the way, is what pretty much happens.
It's basically what happens. It's a long duel. Most physical exchanges, if they're long, they're usually long because the people are talking. This is a pretty, aside from the opening words, this is a wordless exchange. We don't usually get much moment-to-moment fighting. I feel like it's there in the final confrontation between Hector and Achilles. But here we have, we get moment-to-moment combat. We even get some what I read as slow-mo, where
I absolutely read it that way.
Yeah, like the spear punching through Hector's shield, and it like cuts his chain shirt, but he twists out of the way, and it like he manages to dodge it. Like that's something that's happening in slow motion.
One thing that I thought is that at times it almost read how I would like think of someone storyboarding for like a movie. Mm-hmm. There are descriptions that like I was able to literally view in my head because they make such a striking image, and you see it like frame by frame.
Yeah, as you said, Hector kind of gets his ass kicked. Ajax is very strong.
Ajax is strong. He's fast for someone of his size. Like, he's an incredibly skilled fighter.
What's especially interesting to me is there's a lot that's interesting about the duel, but we do have to keep this moving. The most striking thing for me was the usage of rocks.
Yeah, he throws boulders. I feel like rocks are like an understatement.
Well, Hector throws, and this is not too unusual. I think we'll see more rock throwing in the next book that we talk about. But, Hector hefts a rock and chucks it at Ajax, and Ajax is described as lifting up a boulder and throwing it at him, and it hits him. He catches it with his shield, and he gets like crushed under it, and he has to stand back up to fight him some more, or he would rather. I just find the image of like warriors lifting up rocks and shucking them at each other.
Yeah, and I feel like every time they talk about people like heaving up rocks, it's always like a boulder greater than any man could ever think to heave. But like every character who does that, no matter how like small or large they are, it's not just Ajax, it's like other characters as well. It's always a boulder, that no man could ever conceive of lifting, but they like just easily like prop it up and like yeet it over towards their enemy.
Yeah. Well, there's a specific line that sometimes accompanies these boulder heaving instances. Something that would be too heavy for normal men to lift today, weak as men are now. Like that, yeah. Weak as men are now is a recurring phrase that happens, and I guess that's another thing I'm curious about. But Ajax is clearly not as weak as men are now. He's very strong, and so are others who similarly. I think there's one instance where someone literally rips a wall apart with his bare hands. I can't remember what book that's in, but
there's a lot of really crazy stuff going on.
Anyway, I imagine if the duel keeps going, Ajax absolutely kills him, but it doesn't. Night comes again, which makes me wonder, like, what time of day this was. Like, this stuff seems to have happened kind of quickly.
Yeah, I feel like there are some like loose references to time in a lot of these books, but not really when I wanted it to be like, when is it? Is this nightfall? Is this more like, when is this happening? Is the sun shining and like beating on them, or is it like cold because it's night? I don't know.
I feel like there's at least one instance where like Hera or someone like literally drags the sun up or down or something like that
Yeah, and
to
there's
interrupt
also
the fighting.
like there are clouds of mist and stuff like that. In addition to mist being lifted from people's eyes, which is more of a kind of metaphorical thing, but like there are actual like I will put a storm here.
If it is as late as is required for the sun to naturally drop, Apollo has chosen a very late time to call a stop to this battle. And he's not probably not saved too many lives in that action. But the night comes, a couple heralds from either side come out and say, "Hey, it's nighttime. Why don't you guys stop?" And after that, we're sort of treated to a kind of echo of what happened in book 6 between Glaucus and Diomedes. Not so much in terms of like, oh, your family housed mine, but they still exchange gifts.
Yeah, I would categorize these as like acts of hospitality. And I think that's something that Dan kind of spoke to with the Greek word that I have now forgotten. But there are these exchanges of like these rituals that we talk about over and over because there's so much ritual. But this is where they get to like agreeing to let each other burn bodies and things like that. If I'm correct.
Well, that doesn't come out of this exchange. This exchange is literally.
Oh, you're talking about earlier on.
Well, no, this is right after they finish their duel, where Ajax says, I'll stop if Hector says he wants to stop because he's the one who issued this challenge, and Hector says, "Sure, I'll stop," and then he says, "But let's exchange gifts so that people can see that." Even though we started off battle with great hatred toward each other, we've left as friends. And then,
Gotcha.
Hector gives him his silver-studded sword, and Ajax gives him a
purple
belt.
The belt, the war belt.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I skipped forward a little bit.
Yeah, which is a little bit weird. It's odd. I keep saying weird and odd. I need to find new descriptors, but especially knowing what comes later, where Ajax and Hector will sort of have this kind of intense feud where Ajax is trying to beat back Hector from the ships, and he's like sweating and tired. Like, this declaration of friendship doesn't seem to amount to too much. It doesn't amount to what Glaucus and Diomedes came to, which is, hey, let's not kill each other.
I think I see it less as a declaration of friendship so much as a declaration of civility almost.
So the word that's used is specifically friendship. Yeah, here it is.
Oh no, you're right. First they fought with heart-devouring hatred.
Mm-hmm.
Then they parted, bound by pacts of friendship.
Yeah.
Okay, I forgot
it's very explicitly a declaration of friendship. Now again, I'm not sure what the implications of this friendship are, but it doesn't seem to amount to much later, which is
I think I interpret
odd.
more as that the kind of thing that you say as an act of civility. Like, yes, the word that they use may be friendship, but I don't think they're like, we're going to be buddies now, because they know that they're still on opposite sides of a great conflict.
I guess if that's true, though, if it's just like a thing that you do, I wonder like what the point of even doing it was.
Ceremony. Honestly, ceremony.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, maybe.
To be able to say that you did the thing, we did the thing, pacts of friendship, take the belt, take the sword, kill you later.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, they didn't promise to not kill each other in the way that Glaucus and Glaucus and Diomedes did. In any case, they part. Night is fallen, and we sort of get to see the aftermath in the two sides. On the Achaean side, there's a feast being thrown for Ajax because he's really cool and he clearly won. And it's also the part where Nestor makes an interesting proposal where, well, interesting is the wrong word. It makes a lot of sense to build a rampart and dig a trench and burn the bodies, collect the bodies and burn them so that they can, bring the bones back home to fathers or sons or whomever. This always confused me when I read it. Like, the prospect of building an entire rampart and digging an entire trench over the course of one night. Like, how does one do that even?
With a bunch of people.
With a bunch of people, yeah. But I mean, it's dark. I don't know if, have they brought lumber?
It seems
what are
like
the logistics of this?
to use an adjacent person, it seems like a rather Herculean task.
Yeah, and they have plenty of strong men, but it strikes me as very impossible that they would be able to erect this fortress in a day, or not even a day, a night. What is interesting about this fortress, though, is that it's kind of setting up the reversal of roles that's about to happen in the Iliad. Obviously, the Achaeans are quite bent on assaulting the Trojan walls and bringing it down and raising their streets and all that stuff. But what I don't imagine they expected was to be pushed back against walls of their own by the people whom they had originally intended to lay siege to. So we're going to see that happen in slow real time.
They didn't expect it at all. But at the same time, maybe they should have seen it coming.
Well, why would they? Zeus gave
that's true.
The thumbs up.
But we know
all the more shocking.
We know the gods are liars.
Yes, we know the gods are liars, and
they don't quite as much, but maybe they should.
I feel like some of them do.
That's kind of what gets me sometimes. I'm just like, how do none of you see this coming?
Well, on the Trojan side, we have another section where, or rather, we have a section where a sort of obvious solution to this whole problem is being introduced, which is, why doesn't Priam just order Paris to give up Helen? I feel like that would be Helen and her treasures. That doesn't seem to be like a terribly tall or out of left field order. That seems like something you would do as, king of Troy to protect yourselves. Son, hey, you got to give this back.
And Paris is just like, no, I don't think I will. We can give them everything else. We can give them the prizes. We can give them all of the ill-gotten gains, but definitely not the woman.
And Tenor, one of the wise old men, basically just says, hey, why don't we give Helen back so that we can, survive? Which again seems like something you should have done a few years ago at least. But Paris objects to this. He says, yeah, as you said, he'll give all the treasures and stuff, but he'll keep Helen because he wants to keep Helen, I guess. And Priam, he basically agrees with him. He's like, yeah, send a herald out, make this trade proposal, and that's that.
Let's see if this works. Can we get this to work? I would love if we could get this to work.
Yeah, well, it seems weird because Priam, at least by my estimation, Priam is sort of cast as this wise king. And so why wouldn't he just make that call? It seems like good advice.
I feel like it's a really interesting position that he's in. And I also feel like there's an interesting portrayal of Priam that kind of sometimes bounces between really wise king, but also a little bit doddering old fool. I don't know.
Okay.
That may be slightly influenced by having watched Troy and just seeing Peter O'Toole kind of fill that a little bit. But it's also just, I don't know, there's something that seems fragile about Priam sometimes.
Yeah, maybe he has a soft spot for Paris.
I think he does. It's almost kind of like a parent who spoils, a teenage boy, and then the kid grows up and is a little shit. But the parent doesn't actually want to really discipline them, but at the same time they get frustrated, but they won't discipline them because they love them and they think that that's the way to get them to come around. And Paris is that little shit.
That makes some sense. Yeah. Again, it seems weird that he'd put this little shit in front of Troy. Maybe. Wait, I'm not gonna do it. Maybe we'll figure out the answer to this by some other means later.
Oh, could you have made it any more obvious?
What are you talking about, Llama? I'm not talking about anyone in particular. Definitely. Or anything in particular.
Definitely not a certain resident expert who I just saw you literally restraining yourself from saying the name.
Whoa, you're the one who's talking about resident experts. We'll move on from these obvious lies that are being told about me, and there are a couple more noteworthy things which happen in this book. One, the Trojans send out their herald, whose name it looks like Ideus. He delivers the proposal, and this is the first of a couple instances where we get sort of something I referred to in, I think, last episode, where or maybe the episode before, where sometimes messengers break the not tradition, the expected pattern of, like, here's a message, messenger, deliver this message, and then they deliver it verbatim or very close to verbatim. Sometimes it's a little bit different, like
it's
in
a
book
little
2.
bit of a game of telephone. They say what they were told to say, and then they add a little bit of extra spice.
Well, not always is the thing. Like, sometimes it's very, like, even in book 2, where, like, there are, like, little differences, at least in the translation, between the three dreams. They're still, like, effectively the same. Ideus delivers the proposal of, hey, we'll give you all this stuff, and we'd like to call a truce to bury bodies. And Ideus also adds, also, Paris is the worst ever. Everyone hates him. He's messed everything up for us. And he just throws that in there. He editorializes this very clear message, which was just meant to be like, hey, here's what we're thinking.
He tacks on a brutal roast of Paris. It's awesome.
Yes. And he's not the first messenger to do this. We'll see actually a little bit of that in the next book as well. But Agamemnon agrees only to burning the bodies. In fact, Diomedes, I think, stands up and says, aha, the fact that they're even interested in making this trade is proof that we're winning this fight. Like, they're scared. They're afraid.
We've backed them into a corner.
Yeah, which shows a little, I'm not sure how hard we're supposed to read into this, but it shows a little, I'm not sure if immaturity is the right word, but something along those lines with Diomedes. And it's difficult to tell what the actual sort of mindset is when it comes to who wins a war, right? Like, obviously the people who come out on the winning side have it a little bit better, but in another way, no one wins because a bunch of people die.
Yeah.
And we already know that a bunch of Achaeans are definitely going to die. Even when they, as best as I understand, even after taking Troy, they've suffered so many losses, and they still have to get home, and some of them don't make it home. And so even though they won, which
nobody
they did,
wins. Nobody actually wins.
In that little passage, it seems as though Diomedes is offering a very two-dimensional understanding of, I guess, war and its effects. And this feels supported by the fact that the poem is fairly regularly deriding the gloriousness or the joys of war, which are not very many.
Yeah, I think it constantly draws that contrast, though, because there are other areas where, like, references to the ingloriousness of war is also made. Yeah. So
like how brutally people die.
It's a dichotomy that runs through, like, every book of the poem.
Yeah, and Diomedes bringing up, like, this concept of...
See, the impression that I got from the, like, the neck of Troy is in the news, her doom is sealed, like, famous last words. We know, obviously we know how it's gonna go, but just, like, anytime someone makes a statement like that, I'm just like, ooh,
we're sure to win now.
Don't like that. That feels a bit gutsy.
Yeah, and afterward, this truce is made, at least with burning the bodies. Agamemnon is agreeable to that. So there's this little, ceasefire where they'll collect the bodies, burn them some distance away, and the Achaeans also go to work building the walls and the ramparts and the trenches. And in response to this, we get we'll cap off with this. We get a brief sort of, I guess, exchange between Poseidon and Zeus about this wall. where Poseidon basically says, hey, they didn't sacrifice anything to me when they built this wall. And on top of that, this wall will be remembered more than some other wall that I made. I don't know what story this is referring to, but there was a wall that he and Apollo made at some point. And it was like, oh, we sweated and we broke our backs for it. And this one, they didn't even sacrifice anything to me. They just built it.
I don't like this at all, and I'd like to destroy it. And Zeus is basically just like, yeah, that makes sense. Why would they not do that? Okay, level it. Go nuts.
He sort of says that. For one thing, he's not totally with it, because he responds, but filled with anger, Zeus, this is in response to sort of the complaints I outlined. Zeus, who marshals the thunderheads, let loose now, unbelievable, god of the earthquake, you with your massive power, why are you moaning so? And he goes on to talk about how far-reaching Poseidon's own fame is, and why he's almost deriding him for like being kind of a petty child about it.
But the thing is, the impression that I got is like, why are you so self-important? But like, yeah, go do that. Okay, fine. And then he kind of continues on his own thing, plotting, and...
Yeah. It is important to note that he said, while he does say, go do that, he says specifically, wait until they've gone. Like, wait until this war is over. You can't bring it down now. This wall is important. But afterward,
it's part of my plan, but then you may smash it.
Yes. And yeah, that's book 7. We sort of meandered about a little bit in this book because a lot happens, but it's all like little bite-sized stuff, some fun little observations. We'll take a quick break, and we'll jump right into book 8. Stick around.
Hello, dear listener, and thanks for sticking with us through our little break. We'll be back in just a couple minutes, but I'd like to take a moment during the break to thank a few people and give a little information about the podcast. First, thank you for listening. This podcast has no sponsor. We've produced everything in-house and on our own time, and if you all are enjoying the fruits of our labor, that is the best thanks we can imagine. You can follow us on Twitter at Homer_bound for new episodes, or just watch our podcast page wherever you're listening to us now. I'd like to thank Wriste for inviting me along on this adventure, which has been such great fun. I'd also like to thank the composer and performer of all the music you've heard throughout the episode, who happens to be my dad. Thanks, Dad. You are the absolute best. I'd also like to thank Bubbo for her contributions to the audio, Webs2D for original art of my llama character, Total Love for additional art and graphic design, and Ghosty for graphic design as well. I'd like to thank our many guests for their time and expertise, and finally, an especially big thank you to Dr. Daniel, who closes out each show with additional insights on our discussions. We hope you'll consider reading along with us. We are using the Robert Fagles translation of the Iliad, and while we try to keep things intelligible for those who are new to the story, you might get more out of our discussions if you've read ahead, so feel free to pause and return later once you've read up. We would also like to remind you to stay tuned after Wriste and I have finished, since Dr. Daniel will have some awesome words of wisdom to add to our discussion. All right. Thanks for hanging out through our break. I will give it back to me and Wriste for the second half of this episode of Homer Bound.
And welcome back to Homer Bound, where we're going to talk about Book 8. We're back from our break. I have watered my legs and stretched my refill, and hopefully Llama has done exactly the same.
I have done the same. I have more tea. Things are good. As you will come to learn, I run off of tea.
It's probably better than coffee.
I love tea. It's one of the better concoctions on this earth, as far as I'm concerned.
I've always been a sucker for the flavor of coffee, even if the caffeine kind of makes my head hurt.
I also love coffee. I like hot beverages. I'm a
I like
sucker
coffee ice cream.
for a hot beverage. Coffee ice cream is good, and coffee yogurt too.
Ooh, coffee yogurt. I don't think I've ever had that.
It's
That sounds
quite
delightful.
good. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I'll have anything flavored coffee. So
I agree.
anyway, let's get into book 8. The tide of battle turns. Another very clearly named book, and this sort of signals, well, as the title suggests, the tide of battle is going to turn. This is sort of what we alluded to a little bit earlier, where there's sort of a reversal of roles happening, where the Achaeans have sort of come to Troy with the intent of storming their walls, and now the Trojans are going to storm the Achaeans' walls, and the Achaeans have fashioned a sort of facsimile of the wall across from them. So there are these two kingdoms, one strongly established and one a little bit more makeshift, sort of going head to head. And the Trojans, against all odds, despite them having fewer numbers and fewer champions, are going to sort of start pushing the Achaeans back. And this stretch of battle will go all the way up into their ships. I guess for context, at least as best I understand it, the Achaeans have dragged their ships onto the Trojan beaches, and they have surrounded these ships with their walls and their trench that Nestor suggested they build, which was a good suggestion by him, because they're going to need them
a lot.
And yes, the Trojans are going to try to bring fire to these Achaean ships to prevent their escape, and if Hector will have his way, to rout them completely. So that's what is starting off in book 8.
Although,
or rather, that's
as we are about to see, not without an insignificant, not without a not insignificant amount of help from the gods. Realize what I was saying and was like, no, it's
you double negative yourself into oblivion.
My brain just turned on me there.
That's okay. We knew what you were talking about.
Indeed. The gods are going to interfere at great length.
Well, one god specifically. In fact, the fewer gods will be interfering. I think but I know that last episode I asked you the question, has Zeus decreed that no one else should mess with his war yet? And you said no. I was like, okay. And this is where he does it.
This is the moment.
Yes, this is where, Zeus just straight up rolls up and he says, listen, I have the strongest muscles and the largest beard.
I am a very large and powerful person. Did you know that?
You have to listen to me. Yes.
Were you aware?
He talks all this shit, and it's obviously meant to intimidate all the other gods. And after talking all this shit, he says, hey, no one better interfere with this war. I'm the captain now.
Athena gets a little mouthy. Athena's just like, yeah, we know you're powerful. We were just helping them a little bit.
Well, I guess as best as I see it, I think this is genuine, oh, I didn't want to anger you sort of thing. Yeah, we'll be good. Don't worry about it. Which makes Zeus's response all the funnier because he's talked all this mess. He's given this order, and Athena's like, whoa, hold on, big guy, dad. He's
like, nah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Zeus follows it up with
I have it right here.
Yeah. Well, why don't you read us? So Zeus has again. He's given his decree. He's talked about how strong his muscles are. Athena has basically said, "Whoa, chill out. We didn't mean to. We'll be good. Don't worry about it." And Zeus responds with,
Zeus, who drives the storm clouds, smiled and answered, "Courage, Athena, third born of the gods, dear child. Nothing I said was meant in earnest. Trust me, I mean you all the goodwill in the world."
It's such an asshole response.
It was just a prank, bro.
I'm just joshing you.
I'm just kidding.
Obviously, he isn't, and I think it's fairly clear that when he says this, he's being very coy. I don't think anyone believes that last statement he made for a moment.
Cheeky, cheeky Zeus.
Yeah, but like it's the back and forth, the tug of war of these gods. Sometimes Hera will make fun of him and like egg him on, and sometimes Zeus gets to be like, hey, I'm the best, you're not. Look at me, firstborn of the gods, woo! And
I mean, that's the perks of being the greatest Sky Daddy of all the Sky Daddies.
The greatest Sky Daddy. All right, well, he does more than just level some hilarious threats against his constituents. He also, we get to see Zeus's scales.
And this is like going from a moment of levity for, I know, both you and me, because I found the first part genuinely hilarious, and then it transitions into one of what I think is like one of the absolute coolest passages in the entire Iliad. Zeus's scales are super cool.
Yeah. Was there a portion you wanted to?
The portion that I would want to.
It's a fairly long passage.
It is a fairly long passage, so I don't want to read all of it, but it just has this gravity to it, this blurb.
Yes, absolutely.
Where, like, it becomes really serious all of a sudden, because Zeus is literally holding the fates of these two armies in his hand. And I guess the line that stuck out to me most is, the father raised it high, and down went Achaea's day of doom, Achaea's fate, settling down on the earth that feeds us all, as the fate of Troy went lifting toward the sky. And that's exactly what happens. He pushes, he basically puts his finger on the scales, and Troy's, odds go up, and Achaea's odds go down. And it's simple as that.
Are these scales something that he controls, or are these scales like, do they represent something that's like real it's obviously a bit metaphorical. Like, I don't know what shape the fates of the Trojans and the Achaeans would take. Like, when he lifts these scales, he's clearly doing something. Like he's
and I don't think
he's not just decreeing like, hey, one side gets fucked now. He's saying like, oh, let's weigh them on these scales and see who loses. And
yeah, I don't think it's literally, like I said, him putting his finger on the scales. But I do think that there is a degree to which, like, this has been his plan all along. Like, he seems to have this plan. So, like, in a way, to me, it makes the lifting up of the scale and the one fate going one way and the other going the other seem almost kind of perfunctory. Like, he knows he knows what the result is going to be, I believe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And so the lifting up of the scales is not to say, like, which one will come down. It is a lifting up of the scales to show this one is going up and this one is going down.
Since Zeus is the strongest of the gods, by him merely determining that one side will win over the other may be enough to
automatically sway those scales. Yeah, I don't know.
Itself.
That's just my interpretation of it. But I love that image of him lifting this up. And of course, like, everyone kind of sees this. I don't know. It says, like, the white terror seized them all. The men looked on in horror.
Yeah, in response to his
crash
his
of thunder.
Yeah.
Which is just, like, the immediate result of, like, this is what the fate is. This is what is happening.
Yeah, in fact, it's actually, I feel like this is the only time that Zeus really acts in a ultra direct way. It's in that same passage. This is line 89. It says he's hurling his bolts in a flash against Achaea's armies. He's attacking them. It's direct attack, and this is not the first time it happens in this book. It happens again a little while later to Diomedes specifically. But yeah, he's directly assaulting the.
This is one of
forces.
The very few times where Zeus doesn't delegate.
Yeah, he's taking matters into his own hands. So maybe our theory that by Zeus merely acting upon it, he's sort of put his thumb on the scale, so to speak. This seems to hold some water, because he is, as I said, like he is striking terror in the Achaeans by just existing and throwing out his thunder and and terrifying them all.
Yeah, and I mean, when I read that passage, I almost see it as kind of one fluid motion of him bringing the scales up in his arm, and as he sees the motion of it, kind of casting his other hand down and just raining thunder and lightning on these people.
And everyone flees. Well, the Trojans are emboldened, but the Achaeans, even all the great heroes, run away, or rather, they would all have run away. Apparently, one of Nestor's horses has fallen, and Diomedes and Nestor's fallen, and he can't get up. And Diomedes.
If only he had life alert.
If only he had life alert, he could have survived. Oh, but he does survive. Nestor does survive, because Diomedes comes to his aid.
Yeah.
This is another kind of funny part where Diomedes notices that Nestor has fallen, and he turns to Odysseus, who he assumes is right behind him, and basically says, "Hey, Odysseus, help me out with this guy."
Odysseus
is already gone. He's already running away.
He's like speed walking. He's speed walking away.
Yeah, like speed walking, or rather, if this were a cartoon, we would have Diomedes like look over his shoulder, and we just see we'd hear like a.
It's like Roadrunner, when Roadrunner gets the legs start going, and then it's there for a second, and then the next thing you see it's just a puff of smoke.
It's difficult to tell if he's actually ignored Diomedes or if he's already gone with everyone else, because we're focusing on Odysseus, but everyone has run.
Everyone
for good reason.
Terrified.
Although that being said, so Diomedes gets Nestor. He's actually using Aeneas's team from book 5. The horses that he told Sthenelus to take when he struck down Pandris.
Yeah, and Nestor takes the rein and is just going hard.
Yeah, he's gung-ho to leave. What's interesting here, and this is sort of to cash in on my question of what is cowardice or courage. Diomedes has this very conversation with Nestor. Nestor basically says, "Hey, we better go. Zeus is attacking us right now." And Diomedes says, this is around line 160. He says, "Right, old soldier, all you say is true, but here's the grief that cuts me to the quick. One day this Hector will vaunt among his Trojans, Diomedes ran for his ships, I drove him back. So he'll boast, I know, that the great earth gape and take me down that day." And Nestor kind of has to talk some sense into him. He's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever, let him do it."
Well, he kind of is just like, would you rather be dead now and have that be true, or like, would you rather live and then perhaps be able to change that?
Well, so what's interesting is that I suspect that's what's going through Nestor's mind. He gives him a reason, I think, that would appeal to Diomedes, which is that no one would believe him if he said this, because you are so strong. It would seem very weird for Hector to have, just chased you off for no good reason. And so of course Nestor in his age and his wisdom would say, "Hey, this is lost cause," but I read this as him being tactful.
Well, he's appealing to his sense of pride. Diomedes is saying, like, I won't be called weak here, and he's like, who could call you weak? You killed all these people in the prime of their days. Like, what are you talking about? Let's go.
Yeah, and I don't think if Nestor had said something like, "Better to be alive than dead," I don't think that would work for Diomedes. He would just be sort of where he is, grappling with his pride. But Nestor answers it rather directly. I think he does this a few times. He appeals to the nature of the people he's advising. I think he does this as well to Agamemnon in the next book, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the things about him being the older, wiser voice in the grand scheme of things, is like he's seen these situations happen in battle before. He kind of knows how to talk people out of their, worst or prideful or whatever moments that they're having. He kind of is able to read the situation and be like, this is how he's feeling. Let me appeal to this sense within him so that I can get him back to safety, because I can kind of see what's about to happen here right now.
He knows that the real actual reason for why they should run is not terribly interesting to Diomedes. And that just shows how much we've talked about how much we like Nestor, although we've made fun of him for talking about how old he is all the time. But this sort of thing shows how he's kind of on another level.
This is the flip side of that. It's the flip side of that, you know, like he talks about how old he is all the time and we make fun of it, but at the same time, that's part of why he's important. You need that old guy who has all of the back in the day stories, because the stuff that happened back in the day often repeats itself. And that's a good person to have around when you need advice.
Yeah, and more so than just, you know, he also knows that it's not just the straight, cold, hard facts that people will listen to. He also has to convince them of these facts. You can't take for granted that they'll listen to him because he's old, which is also a very, I think, wise observation of him. Because like he could just say, "Hey, I'm," and he does sometimes play the "I'm older than you" card.
Yeah.
But you know, there's no time for that here. You know, lightning is fizzling at their feet, and so they have to make their escape, and they do.
With great haste.
With great haste. It's a neat little moment because we get more of Diomedes, and Diomedes is really cool. And we also get to experience a bit of Nestor in shorter form. This is probably one of the shorter paragraphs that he's spoken in, where he just gives, you know, a few lines as opposed to, you know, a couple pages worth of stories. But after this, you know, the Achaeans are obviously on their back foot. They're running. Hera sees this, and part of me wonders, what stood out to me about the ending of the last book is that it felt kind of weird for Poseidon to just kind of show up and talk about this. And perhaps like this, there's like a reason outside of this for having him there, but I feel like that scene was there to establish Poseidon as being a player in this game. So that when he appears in this book, we kind of have a precedent for him.
It reminds me of like the end of an HBO show when like a character that you know that you're going to be seeing as a character in upcoming episodes comes, and they do the thing where they like look over what's happening and you're like, oh, who's that? It feels like that kind of an introduction of like, here's the looming shadow that's going to be now interfering in the rest of these episodes, you know, in the context of like an HBO show or something. But in this case, it's Poseidon. He just shows up and he's like, I'm going to be a part of this coming up. Wait and see.
Wait and see. Well, I mean, that's kind of what he tells to Hera too, because Hera sees that Zeus is just going to town on the Achaeans. She's like, wow, Poseidon, you need to do something about this. You're just gonna let your
just
brother
gonna let this happen? You're just gonna let him go completely buck wild? You're not gonna do anything?
Yeah, and Poseidon basically says, yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Do you know what he's like?
Yeah, so Hera is trying to, I think she's trying to like trick Poseidon into
I
like,
read
acting.
it as him being goaded by her to step into the fray more completely.
He's like, hey, you see this? Oh, it sucks, doesn't it? You know, if only someone would do something about it. And Poseidon's response is exactly, I'm not gonna mess with Zeus.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, he'll crush us all, is what he says. He's too strong, even against all the gods, apparently. And I guess I'm curious as to what that looks like what it looks like for Zeus to be stronger than all the gods combined, including his earth-shaking brother Poseidon.
Again, the epithets that come up for these characters, I love earth-shaking Poseidon.
But it does sort of cash in again, like we've talked a little bit about like strong characters talking about how strong and powerful they are. You know, Agamemnon and Zeus talking up their game, and Zeus does have the goods to back it up, and everyone else seems to acknowledge this. Even Poseidon, who really doesn't like being under Zeus's thumb, is keen to avoid that.
I wouldn't love being under my big brother's thumb. That would get annoying pretty quickly, but clearly he is, because as they mentioned so many times, Zeus, nobody wants to fight him. Nobody ever wants to fight him. He will wreck everyone. I think that's just like being the father, or the head figure of all of the gods. Like, he has to be more powerful. He's the leader of the pack.
again, I'm unfamiliar with what the actual power dynamics are, but for all intents and purposes, this is the case. And after as the Achaeans sort of run off, Agamemnon he has to sort of rouse his troops. He has to bring them. He has to give them courage in some way. And this starts on line 260, where he sort of rides around and asks, where's your courage gone and all that. There's also a very. This is one instance, again, to call back to what we talked about in the not last episode, but for the last book, line 271, where he does recognize that he has been struck with madness. He recognizes this in what's happening very clearly, because Zeus is by Zeus's word that he came here, and now Zeus is literally throwing lightning bolts at him. Like, Father Zeus, when did you ever strike a mighty king with such mad blindness? He says this.
Literally told me I came here to win, and now you're taking it all away from me.
There's another interesting line which contributes a little bit to my campaign to bring you around to Agamemnon just a little bit, where he this is toward the end of his speech or prayer. So he prays to Zeus. I'm not sure when he or if he's no, excuse me. I guess I was incorrect. I guess he is he's both rousing his troops or like deriding or yelling at his troops, and he's praying to Zeus kind of at the same time. He addresses them by, calling them coward, like asking them where their bluster has gone. And he's also praying, especially at the end explicitly, where he says, so Father, at least fulfill this prayer for me. Let the men escape with their lives, if nothing else. Don't let these Trojans mow us down in droves. And viewed cynically, this prayer can mean a number of things. Agamemnon maybe he's doing it for show. Maybe he's trying to show his men that he cares about, or that he wants them to survive, or perhaps that this is motivated by a desire for good legacy, where at least his the king defended his people or something like that. If not in prayer, then or if not in battle, then at least in prayer. But again, I think I don't have much reason to see this as an insincere.
Yeah, I don't think
prayer.
I see this prayer as insincere as I see other moments of his. Again, I think there are peaks and valleys with Agamemnon. I think there are moments where I find him to be really genuine, and there are moments where I'm like, really? And this is one of those moments where Zeus is struck by him and is filled with pity for him, and that in its way, makes me feel like it's a more genuine outpouring. So I don't think Zeus would really not be able to see through that if it were not a genuine outburst of emotion. But I also think that emotions can be multifaceted. I think that it's possible to have a genuine want for your people to be saved, but also have it come from multiple places, whether it's conscious or not. That's the other thing. I think some of the lesser qualities that I ascribe to Agamemnon are not necessarily ones that he realizes he has.
I think very few people in this story recognize that they have their. I don't think Achilles thinks he is like wrong or
no,
bad
I don't think he sees that that he feels that he's wrong or bad. But I do think that there's some characters in these books who are a little more aware of their faults and a little bit more aware of like that other people might see fault in their actions where they feel that they're right.
You know who does see that? You know who does see fault in themselves? Agamemnon.
He sure does, but I don't.
In book 2, he was very quick to notice that it was he. I think he explicitly says, it was I who wronged Achilles.
For sure.
If only we could work together.
He definitely has his moments of it. I just think that perhaps there could be more of those moments from him.
Sure, yeah. And to be clear, when we're talking about someone's character, the bar is weird. It's low sometimes. It's always sort of being graded on a curve, this book, this story is filled with people who are very complicated. It's difficult to say like to what degree they are virtuous or vicious. But again, by my estimation, when the pressure's on, Agamemnon seems, even if he doesn't make the best decisions, he's also ready to be convinced to make the right decision. He listens to good advice, which is, I think, the mark of a wise person. And
Yeah, I think so.
which is more than you can say for someone like Achilles, who doesn't listen to good advice at all.
Achilles doesn't listen to anyone.
He doesn't listen to anyone, not even his best bud, Paddy. Who of course we'll talk about later. But yeah, anyway, that's all I've got to say about Agamemnon for now.
Yep.
Agamemnon sort of makes this prayer, and Zeus acknowledges it. He bows his head. He sends them a sign. He says, "All right, you're all not gonna die today."
I love how all of the omens with Zeus, and I know there's some reasoning behind this. I don't know exactly what it is, or at least there's a common theme to this, but it's always like eagles and snakes and stuff.
In this one specifically, not only is it an eagle, the eagle is holding a fawn, which last I checked is that's a decently sized animal, right? Like a fawn is
like a baby deer, right?
Is a baby deer or something like that, which isn't small.
No, it's not huge either, but it's certainly in contrast to an eagle, not tiny.
It's an interesting choice. I don't know. Again, I'm not a seer or an oracle. I can't explain what these mean. But
I got nothing.
Zeus sort of sends this sign, and we're given a little bit more battle. We see some Diomedes. Awesomely enough, we finally get to see Ajax in action, and he's sort of like he's sort of got a master blaster pair up with Teucer, an archer, who is described as like hiding behind his shield, and whenever Ajax lowers his shield, Teucer shoots, and then he ducks down as I think the poem describes it as like a child beneath his mother's skirts. So Ajax's tower shield is likened to a mother's skirt.
Adorable.
It's kind of cute,
I just see him like poking out, like boop, firing little arrows, boop. And of course,
what he does.
These arrows are, killing people.
We're also Teucer has a similar problem as Pandarus. We see more success in him than we do in Pandarus, because Pandarus has unfortunately seen nothing but failure. But Teucer he's also unable to hit his mark. He keeps trying to shoot Hector, and the gods keep deflecting his arrows, which must be rather frustrating.
Yeah,
it happens twice.
And he keeps killing people, and it's like, that's not the one I meant. That's not. Oh, okay. They're not hitting.
I was gonna say there's a surprising amount of that in the Iliad, where someone will like throw a spear or shoot an arrow at someone and it'll miss, but the poet will go on to say, but it hit another guy.
Yeah, and this part, it lists off like 1, 2, 3, like 10 guys that he hits instead of Hector. Just keeps firing off arrows, and none of them ever find their way to the mark, but they're still accomplishing a purpose.
Teucer also doesn't get it as bad as Pandarus. He does get it a little bad, because those rocks that we mentioned kind of make a repeat appearance, where Hector chucks a rock at him as he's coming up, and it strikes him, I guess, in the collarbone or something, which sounds painful, especially if it's thrown by someone as strong as I imagine Hector is. And he kind of goes down, but he's not dead. We'll see more of Teucer later. This is not a debilitating or fatal wound, but he does have to back down.
Yeah, it says where the collarbone bridges neck and chest. And if you all could see the face that I was just making, like thinking of that, like, oh, it sounds like it hurts really bad. Like, not enough to like put you in mortal danger, but just, oh, that sounds painful.
Enough to make you not want to fight as much right
well,
then and there.
It's also enough to incapacitate his arm. Like,
yes, because that's an important part of the arm, the collar part.
Ugh.
I imagine he has to use both of them.
It sounds awful.
So this story is also, or rather, this book sort of does a lot of back and forth between the fighters, the warriors on the ground, and the gods up above, whether it's Zeus or Hera or Poseidon or whomever. And so we sort of spend a little bit of time down on the ground, and then we go back up to see Hera and Athena both figuring that they ought to help. They don't care if Zeus has decreed this dumb decree. They don't listen to that. They're going to do it themselves. They're going to arm for battle. And there's a whole arming scene. In Dr. Daniel's last tag, he talked about, this is like kind of what happens. It's sort of a stock scene where like when people go out, they arm for battle. They get dolled up for battle or to meet Zeus
and
or whatever.
I'm sure we've all seen movies which have those scenes of like people's men strapping on their armor and getting them ready and the whole like pump up music happening. That's what I imagine in my head. Montage music. I love some good montage music.
Yeah, and in fact, them arming for battle kind of echoes that last time they sort of got ready and went to Zeus in book 5. And Zeus is like, all right, go down and do your thing, Athena. But this one subverts that, where the goddesses arm for battle. Zeus notices, and he's like, oh,
Not so fast.
Not so fast. And he sends Iris. I love Iris so much.
I also love Iris.
She's so cool. Let me see.
This is another game of telephone moment.
Well, not so much a game. Sorry,
well,
go on.
She delivers the message basically verbatim, and then at the very end of it tacks on some spice.
I guess the only reason I take issue with the word telephone is that usually in telephone, the interesting thing about it is that stuff gets missed in translation, and so by the time you've got this is not a mistake. She's not blundered in her reporting of this message to.
No,
Hera
but what
Athena.
so what I mean more is that like what she adds to it changes the meaning of it, changes the feeling of it.
It changes the feeling of it, but Iris is a good messenger because Iris doesn't just deliver the message; she also makes sure that the message is received.
She does. She sure does.
There is obviously. Let me look at it. Okay, yeah. So Zeus gives her the message to deliver. This is online like 455 or something like that. And then she goes down to at the outer gates of Olympus. I believe is where they're located. She goes to this place with Hera and Athena, and she delivers this. She starts off by saying, "Oh, where are you rushing now? What is this madness blazing in your hearts? Zeus forbids you to fight for Achaea's armies. Hear his father's threat; he will fulfill it too." And then she goes through all of this like stuff that Zeus like he's gonna smash your shit. He's gonna like shoot you with his lightning bolts and all this stuff.
You're gonna be wrecked.
And she gets to the end, which is But with Hera, though, he's not so outraged, so irate. It's always your way to thwart his will, whatever Zeus commands. And then the part that she adds is, you insolent, brazen bitch. You really dare shake that monstrous spear in Zeus's in father's face? That's what she adds. It's
that changes it for me enough so that I do think it is a game of telephone. 'Cause, like, I think part of a game of telephone is like the first few people usually get the message mostly right. And then, like, things start changing bit by bit. And this is where that happens. She adds
again, I don't view this as a mistake.
It's not that it's a mistake. That's not what I'm saying. Because telephone is not necessarily always a mistake when you start changing things. Because there's always that one person in the group that's like, let me just, like, sprinkle a little bit onto this. That, at least all the games of telephone that I played as a kid.
Okay, fair enough.
So, like, it's not necessarily always a mistake. It's just, like, things get tweaked. I think that's what I mean. Things always end up getting tweaked. And this tweaks it. It doesn't tweak it in such a way so as to negate the message of it, but it tweaks it in that, like, Zeus didn't say that. And Zeus just said, I'm going to smash your shit.
And zap you with lightning bolts.
And then she's just like, you bitch. You thought you could do this? Like, you don't know what you're messing with here.
Or rather, it's difficult to say if she herself is irate or if she is delivering Zeus's irritation along with what he said.
I think it's a little bit of both.
It could be, yeah, for sure. Because I don't think that this is terribly off message. I feel like Zeus has definitely called Hera a bitch before, and he'll do so again
many times.
So I would not dress her down for editorializing that. What is funny about this message is this part. So she says this is around a line. This is on line 482. So you, his gray-eyed girl, referring to Athena, may and this is after her describing all the things he'll do. So you, his gray-eyed girl, may learn what it means to fight against your father. But with Hera, though, he's not so outraged, so irate. It's always your way to thwart his will, whatever Zeus commands.
Like, he's used to the bickering with his wife.
He's used to it from Hera, but Athena, his
little
daughter.
You?
I mean, I think Athena even says something like this, like, yeah, he'll eventually go to calling me like his little gray-eyed girl or something like that. Zeus has, yes, some affection for. I mean, obviously he has affection for his children, and so it's interesting that he in this message makes this distinction. Like Athena, you're disappointing. This is disappointing. Hera, not so much. I understand. This is you.
You're constantly a disappointment to me.
I don't even know if he's disappointed by her anymore. Like, this is just something that
It seems more like he's annoyed by her, but I would imagine he's had his fair share of disappointments with Hera.
It's a weird relationship.
It's not hard to imagine. It's a very, very, very strange relationship.
They can't really get a divorce either. Like they're up there.
They're like irretrievably linked.
So that happens, and the goddesses had this wonderful arming montage, and then Zeus shuts it down through Iris, and then they come back up, and Zeus kind of makes fun of them. He's like, "Oh, you're back, Well, there's you. Well, that shows you what'll happen if you ever try to mess with me."
They come back, and he's just like, you thought you were gonna go down there and have your little fun. Not so fast. Because I'm cooler than you. And you know that. Everyone knows that. I'm Zeus.
And true to form, Athena, in her wisdom, does not respond to her father's taunts and insults. But Hera, of course, I mean, this is par for the course. She usually does this. She swings back at him. I think this is the first part Zeus has really given the spoilers that we've talked about earlier, where he lays out exactly what he basically says to Hera, like, hey, you're gonna have your chance. This is what's gonna happen. Yeah, he lays out his plan. He even names Patroclus, like, yeah, the Trojans are going to like push up to the Achaean ships, and then Patroclus is going to die, and that's going to get Achilles into the mix, and then you'll have your chance.
Yeah, no. It, like, if it sounds at all like this is, like, in any way guarded language, it's not. He literally says, word for word, very plainly, in very few words, without any ambiguity at all, exactly what is going to happen.
This powerful Hector will never quit the fighting, not till swift Achilles rises behind the ships. Beside the ships that day they battle against the high sterns, pinned in the fatal straits and grappling for the body of Patroclus. That is, so runs the doom of Zeus. Curious if doom just means fate, or if it really is just as sinister as the word doom is making it out to be.
Regardless of whether or not it's one of the coolest lines. It's such a cool... So runs the doom of Zeus. Hell yeah.
But yeah, we're told what'll happen, like, not a third of the way through the story. And sure enough, it comes to pass. We're not spoiling anything by saying this happens. It does, and Zeus says it does, and he's right.
I mean, he's the one who decided it.
Yeah, and I guess following that, there's... He squeezes in one more series of insults at Hera before we night falls again. I said that night falls again last book 7, but I meant to say that here. Night fell then, and now it's falling again, which sort of saves. In the last book, it saved Hector. In this book, it saves the Achaeans, because Hector and his Trojans can't advance in the night for one reason or another.
It is their reprieve. One of few that they will see in the books to come.
And Hector is, he's emboldened, and he tells his men to set out watchfires for the night, presumably to keep watch as to whether or not the Achaeans will cut and run, since behind their walls are their ships, and they could very well do that overnight.
Yeah, I love the ending of this book because there's one little passage, and this I think sums up to me like a lot of who Hector is. Around 622, and I won't read all of it, but I'll read a couple little portions of it. Tomorrow Tydeus' son will learn his own strength if he has the spine to stand the onrush of my spear. And then shortly after that, if only I were as sure of immortality, ageless all my days, and I were prized as they prize Athena and Apollo, as surely as this day will bring the Argives' death. I love that little passage.
Yeah, and he's sort of cashing in a little bit on Diomedes' conversation with Nestor.
Yeah, absolutely.
And their spirits are high, and they're ready to go. They're ready for the next day. And I guess this is where we'll call it. We'll end on the image of blazing watchfires throughout the night. We'll sort of see what happens in the next book and the book after that, I suppose, because they both take place over the course of the night, if I'm to understand how time is passing correctly.
Which can be tricky.
Time seems to be a little bit convoluted every so often. But yeah, thanks for watching. These books were sort of they feel like a calm before the storm, even though there's still plenty of fighting. Book 7 was definitely sort of like a downtime, and book 8 was, I guess, knowing what happens next, it feels a little bit less severe because the drama is going to sort of the war drama is going to sort of build as the Achaeans get pushed further and further back.
Not only what happens next, but also like in comparison to books 5 and 6, which are very intense. Get, and as we've mentioned before, we get these lulls, these peaks and valleys, and it's going to ramp back up.
Yeah, and lots of moments of levity too, especially in book 8.
Definitely.
Where I've said it before and I'll say it again. The cutting to the gods is always sort of like darkly comedic. I think it's so much fun to read them as that, especially with how dire and dour some things can get.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening. Of course, make sure to stick around for Dr. Daniel, and we'll have a guest tomorrow with Dr. Joel Christensen, who was kind enough to join us for the next episode. So keep an eye out for that. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Definitely. It's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Daniel. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Daniel, otherwise known as Dr. Daniel, or The Dancing Grad, and I'm here to offer some thoughts on Wriste and Llama's excellent conversation on Iliad Books 7 and 8. As Wriste and Llama mentioned at the end of the episode, Books 7 and 8 are not quite as action-packed or perhaps as exciting as some of the other books that have been discussed so far, or some of the other books that are yet to come. In the very next episode, for example, they're going to be talking about Book 9, The Embassy to Achilles, and Book 10, The Night Raid, or the Doloneia. Nevertheless, Books 7 and 8 give us some really interesting insights into some of the themes of the poem, and also the afterlife of some of its characters. This is immediately apparent in Book 7, which Fagles has titled Ajax Duels with Hector, which, Wriste and Llama point out, is kind of a weird flip of agency here, since it's Hector who poses the challenge to the Achaeans to fight one-on-one. The duel doesn't result in a death, but rather a truce, and Hector ends his speech to Ajax offering this truce by saying, "Let us give each other gifts, unforgettable gifts, so any man may say, Trojan soldier or Argive, quote, first they fought with heart-devouring hatred, and then they parted, bound by pacts of friendship." Wriste and Llama pointed out this word friendship, and what's happening here in the Greek is a different term than the xenia that I talked about in the previous episode, in my tag for the previous episode. Xenia in that episode was guest friendship, wherein it was sacrosanct, and there are reciprocal duties between guest and host. Here the term is philotes, which quite literally means friendship or affection. It's not quite at the same level as xenia, not quite as many obligations, but still a mutual respect between two people. people that gets physicalized in the exchange of gifts. Again, gift exchange is not necessarily a definite part of Philotes, but it happens to be in this case, where Hector and Ajax exchange. Ajax gives his belt, and Hector gives Ajax his sword. The sword that Hector gives Ajax, however, has a long afterlife after the events of the Iliad. This is most clearly seen in a play by Sophocles called Ajax that dramatizes what happens after an event called the Judgment of the Arms. After the Trojan War is over, and after Achilles dies, his magical armor is up for grabs, and two major people make a claim to the arms of Achilles: Odysseus, the trickster, and Ajax, the brute force on the battlefield, second only to Achilles himself in terms of battle prowess for the Greeks. Both men are given a chance to make their case for why they deserve the arms, and because Odysseus is good with words, but Ajax is not, Odysseus wins the arms. Ajax gets really mad at this, because after everything he's done for the Greek army, he's not given the thing that he wants. Ajax concocts a plan to slaughter the entire Greek army as retribution for not giving him what he wanted. The goddess Athena, however, interferes, and when Ajax tries to execute his plan to execute the Greek army, he's actually redirected towards a field of livestock instead, and he ends up killing all of them before Athena lifts the veil from his eyes and he realizes what he has done, and the fact that his plan to murder the entire Greek army has been exposed to the Greeks. The shame of being revealed as a traitor is too much for him to bear, so he ends up killing himself by falling on the very sword that Hector gave him in Book 7 of the Iliad. The origin of the sword is referenced most clearly when Teucer, Ajax's half-brother, comes and sees Ajax's corpse. At lines 1024 through 1027 of the play, he references the sword upon which Ajax's corpse is still impaled, and he says, "Do you see now how, in time, Hector was fated, even though he was dead, to kill you?" So the Iliad plants the seeds for a lot of these stories that come later on, particularly in Greek drama and later epics as well. Now, a few minor points before getting to some of the questions that Wriste and Llama laid out in their episode. In a previous tag, I mentioned the concept of an aristeia, excellence, which is a feature of the Homeric poems, wherein we focus on one character's martial exploits, and we get to see them really tearing it up on the battlefield. And I mentioned a few characters that get an aristeia in the Iliad. For example, Diomedes in Book 5, we get Agamemnon in Book 11, Patroclus in Book 16, and Achilles in Books 20 through 22. That list is not exhaustive, and the definition of an aristeia really depends on what you consider to be excellence in the poems. For example, if you look at the Wikipedia article for aristeia, it actually lists Hector, the Trojan, as getting one in Book 8, which I kind of find take a few issues with in terms of the amount of focus that we get on Hector. Yeah, he's doing some really important things in Book 8, but I don't know if it rises quite to the level of an aristeia. One that I left out is the aristeia of Menelaus, actually, in Book 17. After after Patroclus dies in Book 16, at the very end of Book 16, spoiler alert, sorry, Menelaus actually leads the charge to protect the body of Patroclus and bring him back to the Greek camp. So there are other aristeia in the Iliad and the Odyssey, for that matter, so my list was not exhaustive, and I encourage you to keep looking out for these places wherein we focus on the wartime battlefield exploits of one character in particular. I loved Wriste and Llama's discussion of this idea of undying glory or eternal glory, and whether the Greeks would have associated themselves with that sort of glory that perpetuates throughout time beyond the boundaries of their own mortal lives. This is 150% the case. The Greeks and the Romans exhibited a very strong awareness of the power of memory and the power of tradition, and the ways in which your example could be promulgated throughout generations to come. We see this in lots of aspects of Greek and Roman culture, from tombstones and the ways that the dead are memorialized, to authors who are trying to write themselves into their works. In a Homeric context, remember that the main thing that every warrior is after is glory, kleos, that thing that you get when you go out onto the battlefield, kill a bunch of people, and take their stuff. If we think about this idea at a meta-narrative level, we can see evidence of this within the Iliad itself, about the ways in which glory gets promulgated through the ages. Glaucus and Diomedes talk about the example of their ancestors, Bellerophon and Oinos. We see even Nestor himself, the old guy, who keeps talking about what happened during his own youth as a warrior. The glory question really comes to a head with the character of Achilles in particular, who has been fated to either die young but earn great glory, everlasting glory, or die old but without any glory whatsoever. Llama points out how Achilles seems to be more in the here and now, rather than concerned about the immortality of glory that he will get if he rejoins the battle. But I encourage you to keep track of this question, particularly in Book 9 with the embassy, and then Books 16 through 18, particularly 18, once he finds out that Patroclus has died. And we'll see how that focus has shifted from being in the here and now with Patroclus to going for that glory and getting back onto the battlefield. Another issue that was brought up were these second-person addresses by the narrator to the characters within the story. It's Menelaus who gets the editorial treatment here in Book 7 of the Iliad, when the narrator says, "Then and there, Menelaus, the deathstroke would have blazed before your eyes, dead at the hands of Hector, a far stronger man, if Argive kings had not leapt up and caught you, and Agamemnon basically told you that's a really bad idea." The most notable instance of a second-person address by the narrator, as Wriste mentioned, is going to come in Book 16, when Patroclus is fighting through his Aristea, but the narrator is going to ask him in the middle of, towards the end rather, of Book 16, "Patroclus, who was the first you slaughtered? Who the last, when the great gods called you down to death?" I think these second-person addresses by the narrator serve two purposes. This is just my opinion. I don't know that this is necessarily the case, but this is the sense that I get. The first thing is that these addresses make the character more personable. It's like we're having a conversation with them rather than just seeing them act out their own stories. If we're speaking in terms of I and you, or we and y'all, as opposed to he, she, it, or they, all of a sudden the story becomes much more personal. It becomes much more engaged with our actual experiences. I think these second-person addresses also operate on a more meta level, wherein we're talking about narratorial omniscience, wherein the narrator knows what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, versus the incomprehension of the people on the ground, like Menelaus and Patroclus. Menelaus offers himself as the person to fight Hector, and the narrator says, that's not a really good idea. This is what would happen, you would die, if it weren't for the other folks who stood up to intervene in your plan. So perhaps these second-person addresses by the narrator highlight that disconnect between the omniscience, the knowing everythingness of the narrator versus the fact that human beings on the ground, like Menelaus and Patroclus, don't know what's going to happen. The last question that I have been very specifically asked to answer is, why doesn't Priam tell Paris to give Helen back? And I hesitate to answer this question because I don't think that there's a really good answer that's going to satisfy a lot of people. The cop-out answer is that Troy is fated to fall. They're going to lose. It's going to take 10 years, but that's what's going to happen. So even if Priam were to tell Paris to give Helen back, something's going to go wrong. It's not going to help ameliorate the situation the way that the fates have it laid out, that the city of Troy is going to fall to the Greeks. My other answer is a little bit more banal. We are dealing with a war, after all, between two territories, and what you're after in war is to gain more territory and get some stuff. Whatever the origins of the war, and however wrong Paris clearly is to keep holding on to Helen, if the opportunity exists for Troy to beat Greece and get the stuff from Greece and perhaps annex Greece as a territory, then I believe that Troy is going to do whatever it can to effect that goal. In any case, that's my time. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I'm going to throw it back now to Wriste and Llama.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel, and thank you once again, dear listener, for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well as Dr. Daniel's wonderfully informative expert opinions. We also hope you'll take the opportunity to continue reading along with us, since there is still plenty to love about these stories. Keep an eye out for future episodes by following us on Twitter at Homer_bound, or wherever you happen to be listening to us right now. We're looking forward to seeing you for the next episode, but until next time, take care and thank you for joining us for this episode of Homer Bound.